You think your emotions are the truth, but they've been manipulating you, controlling you, and quietly ruining your life long before you ever noticed. You don't notice it at first. You think you're reacting to reality, but you're actually reacting to a story your emotions wrote for you without your permission. And the worst part is that the story feels real. Your chest tightens, your stomach sinks, your mind races, and you assume the sensation itself is proof. Proof that something is wrong, proof that someone is against you, proof that you're failing, proof that you're not enough. You don't question it because emotions don't ask. They declare. They whisper, "This is the truth," and you obey before you even think. And somewhere inside you, a quiet voice says, "Why do I always feel like this? Why does everything feel heavier than it should?" But you don't answer it. You're too busy surviving the emotion to understand the lie beneath it. This is the trap. Emotions don't reflect the world. They reflect your wounds. The fear you feel before taking a step forward isn't about the step. It's about every moment you once felt unprepared, unsupported, or judged. The anger you feel when someone challenges you isn't about the moment. It's about every time you swallowed your voice. The sadness that hits you for no clear reason is rarely about the present. It's the echo of unresolved moments you pretended didn't matter. You're not reacting to now. You're reacting to a version of you that never got the chance to speak. And here's the part nobody wants to admit. You trust your emotions more than you trust your own intelligence. You let a sudden wave of shame convince you you're unworthy. You let a brief spike of anxiety rewrite your future into something terrifying. You let a moment of doubt convince you that your dreams are impossible. A 5-second emotional glitch can destroy 5 years of effort. Yet you rarely stop and ask, is this feeling even mine? Or is it just a leftover script from an older version of me? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your emotions are not truth indicators. They're survival mechanisms. And survival modes don't care about your future. They only care about preventing pain, even if that means sabotaging your growth. You think your emotions are the truth, but they've been manipulating you, controlling you, and quietly ruining your life long before you ever noticed. You've probably noticed how fast an emotion can hijack your entire identity. One moment you're fine, functioning, thinking clearly. And the next, a single trigger flips a switch inside you. Suddenly, you're not responding as the person you are today, but as the person you were when the original wound was created. That's why you've had moments where you overreacted and later thought, why did I act like that? That wasn't even me. But it was you, just not the version you think you are. It was the version your emotions drag out when they feel threatened, the version that still hasn't healed the moment it learned to fear, hide, apologize, freeze, or obey. This is why emotional lies are so powerful. They don't speak in logic, they speak in memory. Your emotions don't show you what's happening. They show you what has happened and convince you it's happening again. You don't feel anxious because the situation is dangerous. You feel anxious because your nervous system is replaying an old danger. You don't feel unwanted because people are rejecting you. You feel unwanted because a part of you still carries the imprint of rejection that was never resolved. You don't feel incapable because you lack ability. You feel incapable because your mind learned to equate effort with failure somewhere in the past. Emotions are time travelers, pulling your past into your present until you mistake flashbacks for intuition. And there's something even darker underneath all of this. Emotions distort your perception more effectively than any outside manipulation ever could. They convince you that people are judging you when they're not. They convince you that you're being left behind when you're not. They convince you that nothing will work out for you, when the truth is you've simply never taken a step while not scared. You tell yourself, I know myself, but you've only ever known the version of you that lives inside emotional reflexes. The real you, the version that exists outside fear, outside shame, outside the emotional fog, barely gets a voice. Here's the sobering truth. Emotions don't want accuracy, they want control, and they've been controlling far more of your life than you realize. There's a moment you rarely notice, the split second where an emotion appears, and you immediately build a narrative around it. You feel a sudden heaviness, and without hesitation you think, something's wrong. You feel tension in your chest and decide, this situation is dangerous. You feel ignored and conclude, they don't care about me. You don't wait for evidence. You don't pause to verify anything. Your mind rushes to create a story that justifies the feeling because the brain hates emotional uncertainty. So it invents meaning, even if the meaning is wrong, destructive, or completely disconnected from reality. And the worst part? Once the story forms, it becomes almost impossible to challenge. You cling to it, defend it, and repeat it until it feels like fact. This is why you replay conversations in your head that never happened, why you assume people's intentions without ever asking them, why you predict failure before you even begin. You're not overthinking, you're emotionally storytelling. You use your feelings as evidence, and then you use the evidence to reinforce the feelings. It's a closed loop, a psychological echo chamber, and if you're honest, you know exactly what it feels like to be trapped in it. That sinking sensation that whispers, I know I'm probably wrong, but it feels true. And that's enough to scare me. But here's the brutal reality check. Emotional stories are rarely about the present moment. They're about protecting your identity. When you feel abandoned, your mind crafts a story to prevent vulnerability. When you feel unimportant, it builds a narrative where nobody values you. When you feel insecure, it imagines futures where everything falls apart. It's not trying to tell you the truth. It's trying to make you prepared for disappointment. But in doing so, it quietly destroys your ability to recognize opportunities, trust people, or even trust yourself. And this is the pattern you must see clearly. Emotions don't just lie. They create false futures. They make you act as if you're in danger when you're not. They make you withdraw when connection is possible. They make you sabotage yourself out of protection. Every time you believe the emotional story, you shrink. Every time you obey it, you betray the person you're trying to become. There's a very specific moment where emotional lies become the most destructive, when they start shaping your identity. Not your mood, not your day, not your choices, your identity. You feel anxious often enough, and suddenly you start telling yourself, I'm an anxious person. You feel ignored a few times, and you whisper, I guess I'm easy to overlook. You feel unprepared, and the thought becomes, maybe I'm just not capable like other people. These aren't observations. These are emotional conclusions disguised as personality traits. You don't even notice you're rewriting who you are based on temporary internal storms. And soon, the identity you carry is nothing more than a collection of emotional reactions you mistook for personal truth. This is where the quiet destruction begins, because once you accept an emotional lie as identity, you stop fighting it, you stop questioning it, you live inside it like a cage that you believe is a home. You turn down opportunities because that's not me. You avoid risks because I don't do things like that. You shrink in conversations because I'm not the confident type. And somewhere inside you, there's a faint, frustrated voice whispering, when did I agree to any of this? But you ignore it because you've already accepted the emotional blueprint as who you are. And it's terrifying to consider that maybe you've been living as the wrong version of yourself. Here's the raw truth you've avoided. Most of the traits you believe are part of your identity are actually protective reactions. Your sensitivity, your detachment, your self-doubt, your defensiveness, your fear of being seen, these were survival strategies long before you ever called them personality. You didn't choose them. You adapted to old pain, and then you mistook the adaptation for authenticity. And that's the real danger, because when you think an emotional wound is just who I am, you never attempt to heal it. You live inside the wound. You build your habits around it. You shape your goals to accommodate it. The harsh pattern interrupt you need right now is this. Most of who you think you are is not who you actually are. It's who you became to survive moments you don't even remember clearly. There comes a point where emotional lies stop feeling like impulses and start feeling like destiny. You wake up with a heaviness in your chest and assume the day is already ruined. You feel a flicker of doubt and immediately decide the goal is unrealistic. You sense tension in a conversation and conclude the relationship is fragile. You don't question the emotional signal because it arrives faster than logic, faster than awareness, faster than your ability to slow down and interpret what's actually happening. The lie becomes automatic, and because it's automatic, you assume it must be accurate. But emotional speed is not emotional truth, and you've been confusing the two for years. Think about the moments where you abandoned something important before even giving yourself a chance to try. You didn't quit because it was impossible. You quit because your emotions told you it would hurt, and in your mind, hurt equals danger. Your emotions lied, but they lied convincingly. This will go wrong. You'll embarrass yourself. You'll fail again. People will see the real you. and without realizing it, you obeyed. You made decisions not out of logic, but out of emotional predictions. You created a life shaped more by fear than by intention. And somewhere inside you, you know this. You can feel the weight of all the moments you surrendered not because you were incapable, but because you were emotionally misled. Here's the part that should wake you up. Emotions are not designed for growth. They're designed for survival. That means they will always favor the familiar, even if the familiar is destroying you. They will always point you back to old patterns, even when those patterns are suffocating. They will always exaggerate threats, minimize possibilities, and distort your perception until staying small feels safer than expanding. You may think you're being cautious, practical, or self-aware, but often you're just avoiding ghosts. Emotional echoes masquerading as insight. And if you listen closely, you'll notice your inner dialogue betrays this. What if it goes wrong? What if I'm not enough? What if they see me differently than I see myself? These aren't warnings. They're alarms from a past that still thinks you're fragile. Your emotions lie most convincingly when you're on the edge of change, because change threatens the very wounds that created them. There's a terrifying moment you've experienced but never fully understood. The moment where your emotions don't just distort your perception of others, but your perception of yourself. You start doubting your own intentions, your own memories, your own strength. You feel overwhelmed and automatically assume you're weak. You feel misunderstood and assume you're impossible to love. You feel behind in life and assume you're fundamentally inadequate. None of these conclusions come from evidence. They come from the intensity of the feeling itself. The stronger the emotion, the more believable the lie. And you've internalized those lies so deeply that you don't even recognize them as lies anymore. They feel like self-awareness when in reality, they're self-sabotage, disguised as honesty. This is why you keep asking yourself questions that lead nowhere. Why am I like this? What's wrong with me? Why can't I just get it together? These questions aren't reflections. They're emotional traps. They keep you circling inside the same identity your emotions constructed. And notice something, those questions never create clarity. They only reinforce your sense of inadequacy, because emotions don't want understanding, they want certainty. And whether the certainty is empowering or destructive doesn't matter. As long as it feels familiar, your emotional system prefers it. That's why you cling to painful beliefs about yourself even when you know logically they're absurd. Familiarity feels safer than truth. Here's the part you avoid admitting. Your emotions have been making decisions on your behalf long before you consciously think. You think you're choosing silence, but the truth is, your fear of being misunderstood chose it first. You think you're choosing isolation, but your old wound of being rejected chose it before you noticed the urge. You think you're choosing procrastination, but your hidden fear of not being good enough made the choice for you. By the time your mind forms a justification, the emotional decision has already been made. You're not choosing, you're rationalizing, and this is the harsh interruption you need to swallow. Your emotions don't care about becoming the person you want to be. They only care about protecting the person you've been. And until you see that clearly, you'll keep mistaking emotional reflexes for personal truth, building a life around a version of yourself you never consciously agreed to become. There comes a point where you can no longer pretend you're being guided by your emotions. You have to confront the reality that you've been controlled by them, controlled by fear disguised as intuition, controlled by shame disguised as self-awareness, controlled by old memories pretending to be current threats. And once you see the pattern, even for a moment, it becomes impossible to unsee it. You start realizing how many opportunities you walked away from because an emotion whispered, "not safe." You realize how many relationships you choked by assuming the worst before anyone even had the chance to show their best. You realize how many versions of yourself you killed before they were born, simply because an internal surge convinced you something terrible would happen if you dared to grow. And that realization hurts more than anything else, because you see the cost of your obedience. But here is the uncomfortable shift. You are not a victim of these emotional lies. You've collaborated with them. You've chosen the familiar feeling over the unfamiliar future. You've allowed temporary sensations to dictate permanent outcomes. You've trusted fear more than possibility, doubt more than capability, and emotional projections more than actual evidence. And somewhere inside you, you know this. You can feel the part of you that's tired of being dragged around by every spike of panic, every wave of insecurity, every flash of anger. Tired of living small because your emotions prefer safety over self-respect. Tired of shrinking your world to fit the size of old wounds. Here's the raw truth you can't avoid anymore. Your emotions will not suddenly become honest just because you want a better life. They will keep lying. They will keep exaggerating. They will keep replaying the past until you interrupt them, which means the responsibility is yours now. Not to feel differently, but to respond differently. Not to wait for confidence, but to act in spite of the emotional noise. Not to negotiate with the lies, but to refuse to bow to them. So here is your challenge. And it's not comforting. The next time your emotions tell you, don't do it. Not later, not after thinking. The next time you feel the internal resistance rise, act immediately. That single act breaks the lie. And once a lie cracks, it can never control you the same way again.